She gave the end of the story, and I'm going to be giving the beginning. Now, I also have to confess something to you. This is the fourth lecture I've given in 5 days. And before each of those lectures, I've talked to high school students, college students, et cetera, et cetera. I'm very tired, and I feel like I'm in the middle of a shamanistic journey with hot flashes going off and on in my skin. So if I sort of blank out in the middle of it, or if I run off stage, it's just because I've gone to get rid of the Reuben I ate about an hour and a half ago. Okay. Well, now that I have you on my side, what I'm going to talk about tonight is worldview. And I'm going to talk to you about an adventure that me and many of my colleagues have been on for the last 3 or 4 years. We didn't plan to be in this journey. Maya just sort of reached out and snatched us up and shook us and said, "Hey, stupid, look around you." It is the work of epigraphers who study the writing, of iconographers, of archaeologists who dig things out of the ground. It is a combination of all of that with especially collaboration that I've been privileged to have with Mayan peoples in the highlands of Guatemala for the last 5 years. Before I start, I would like you to all contemplate that worldview is just not a series of myths or stories that people tell their children to keep them entertained. It is not Walt Disney. Instead, worldview is a way that peoples around the world have of creating and answering the questions of where do we come from, what are we, what is social life, what is justice, what is injustice, what happens to us when we die, and all of these things. We answer many of those questions, or at least some of them, with science. Maya answered them with metaphors. These metaphors are encoded in myths, but those myths describe the world they saw and understood just as clearly and with as much force as science does for us. So let's turn off the lights. You can go to sleep, and we can look at slides. Okay.
Now, the area that we're going to be looking at is the eastern part of Mesoamerica. Today, there are 10 to 12 million Maya speaking, or there are about 35 Mayan languages that have been recorded. About 25 of them are still extant today. This area includes lowlands, swamps, areas that are very dry in the north, and highland areas in the south here, so that there is an amazing range of topography and of climate in the area. The principal cultigen is maize, and maize provides the basic experience that the Maya used to create their myth of creation and to explain the world. Now, what you're looking at here is you're looking at a milpa, or special maize field of the Maya, in a house I rented in the town of Copan. It's not like cornfields in Iowa. When the Maya farmer plants his corn, he plants 3 to 5 grains of corn in a hole along with the grains of squash. In this case, the Copanecs use ayote squash. Other Maya groups and other peoples use different squashes. What happens is the squash grows out laterally and preserves moisture in the ground, while the corn grows up. Into the same hole also goes seeds of beans. The beans then grow out, climb the stalk, and at the same time they function to fix the nitrogen in the soil to help the corn grow. Now, the life cycle of maize, it's seeding, it's growing, its maturity, the bending over of the stalk to turn the ear down so that it can dry, the cutting off of the ear of corn to take it, the taking of the seeds. All of this is the basis of the myth. Now, as a cultigen, you have to know one other thing about maize that's terribly important. It's a hybridized grass. As a result, it cannot seed itself. Any of you who have ever held an ear of corn know that the corn is covered by shucks. If you drop an ear of corn on the ground with all the shucks on it, it'll just lay there and will not germinate. So what must happen with maize as your main cultigen is human beings must intervene. They must pick off the corn, ear of corn, pull away the shucks, remove the silks, take off the seeds, and then plant the seeds directly. This leads to a relationship between human beings and the supernatural world that is reciprocal. In other words, the gods, including maize, gave themselves up to death so that human beings could be created, and human beings return the favor by nourishing and caring for the maize. Next pair. Now, the maize god was materialized, given form in the myths, as a beautiful young man. He will often wear ears or corn foliation in his head and he will dance with ears of corn. His story is recorded in the way that we have it now in two forms. One is on the pottery and in the inscriptions of the classic period, objects that were made between 200 BC and 1000 AD, and in a great mythic cycle called the Popol Vuh, which is the book of the community, which was recorded in Latin characters, in the characters of Spanish language, recording Quiche language in the 16th century after the conquest. In the 17th century, a Spanish friar named Jimenez was shown the book, allowed to make a copy of it, and he translated it. Thereafter, the original book disappeared, and we have a copy of the Popol Vuh now in Chicago in the Newberry Library. That book has been translated into many languages and published, and thanks to the work of Michael Coe, we can now know, I think without any doubt, that the Popol Vuh records a myth that is extremely ancient in Mesoamerica. It may go back as early as the Olmec to 1000 BC, and it is the core myth of how the world got to be the way it is. In the Popol Vuh, there are two parts. There's the story of creation, and there's the story of how the Quiche nation was formed and the political charter that came out of creation. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to mix the two myths, the two forms, and basically talk to you about the story of the maize god, this myth of creation, and then show you how it unfolds in the classic paradigm. The story goes like this. There were two beautiful young twins, maize gods. You can think of these two as them. In the Popol Vuh, they are called Hunahpu and Hun Hunahpu and Vuku Hunahpu. I'll get my twins right. In the classic period, they have one name. They were just called either Hunal, which means one ear of maize, or Hunalye, which means one grain of maize, or Hunalye Suk, which means one grain of maize, corn silk. These young men were beautiful, they were great ball players, and they were great dancers. Most of all in their lives, like most of your children, they loved to play ball. They played the ball all the time and made a mistake because the floor of the ball court is the ceiling of hell. And so as they played the game and knocked the ball around, they made noise in the underworld, in the hell. And like the first floor apartment dweller, the gods of death got angry. Only they didn't hit the roof with a broomstick. They sent owls up to summon these bad boys down to answer for their lack of courtesy. The boys arrived, and they are sent through a set of trials, which they failed. And because they failed, they were killed. Their bodies were taken to the ball court in the underworld and buried. The head of the older principal brother, Hun Hunahpu or Hunalye, was severed from the body. And next pair. Okay, here's the ball game. Here's the ball player. In this case, the ball is against a stair, but and sometimes the ball court sides, instead of being a stairway, will be terraced. So here's a picture of the ball game. Here's another picture of the maize god. This little tattooing on his face is the early classic version of him. Next pair. And that severed head was carried in a plate to a gourd tree. Here's the head of the maize god. There's the maize on his head there. Here's the bowl of sacrifice, and these are the instruments that cut his head off, or that a Maya farmer will use to cut the ear of maize from the stalk. The head is hung in a gourd tree. This is a gourd tree. Here are the gourds that the story refers to. The gourd tree is a very strange-looking tree. Next pair. This is a pot that shows the gourd tree, and here's the gourd, or the head of the maize god in the tree. Now, the maize god just hung around for a while, and one day this beautiful young lady walks by whose name is Blood. Blood walks up to the head and said, "My gosh, what are you doing there?" They have a short conversation, and the skull, as many boys will do, seduced the girl and said, "Hold out your hand." She held out her hand, the maize god spit in her hand, and lo and behold, she became pregnant. It's Mesoamerica's first immaculate conception. Okay. Her daddy, about 3 months later, figures that she's knocked up. And he gets mad. He gets real mad. He orders her killed. He sends the owls to kill her, but the owls sort of like the young thing. So what they do is they make a false heart out of rubber, give that heart to her father and say, "She's dead, Dad." And the girl is then allowed to go, and she journeys to the middle world where she finds her baby's grandmother and her erstwhile husband's mother, who is the old moon goddess named Shmukane. Eventually, two new sets. Well, before I go to there, here is a picture of a Maya queen in the guise of the moon goddess, who is who Skik is, or who Blood is. You can often tell her because she will wear this net overskirt, and she will have a little shark in a shell on her waist. Next pair. She is the moon goddess, and you will often see her sitting in the moon. She's kind of ugly there, but women get tired. And holding a rabbit. And if you don't believe that the rabbit's in the moon, here's its ears, there's its head, there's its chest, there's its body, here's its with a tail. And I defy you to see the old man in the moon the next time you see a full moon. Next pair. Okay. She gives birth to two beautiful young men, or young boys, babies. In the Popol Vuh, they are called Hunahpu and Shpalanke. In the classic period, they are called one Ahau, or one Lord. Here's a portrait of him. He always has these large spots on his body. The other one is called Yashbalam, or the first Jaguar, and he's always identified because he has pelts of jaguar on his body. Michael called these the headband twins. Now, if you read the Popol Vuh and you follow their adventures, it explains how the world got to be the way it is. It's sort of like a Maya Aesop's fables. That explains how the animals got to be the way it is, why farming goes the way it is, and so forth. One day, the boys are working in their field. As they work, they notice that they are losing corn to something. They can't quite figure out what it is, so they lay a trap. And what happens is that they find in the trap a rat. The boys grab the rat escapes, leaving the fur on its tail in the boys' hands, and that's why rats have no fur on their tail. The boys recapture the rat, okay, if you'll change this one. And the rat says, now wait a minute, don't hurt me, don't hurt me, don't hurt me. I know I stole your corn, but I have a secret you want to know. This is a secret about your fathers. And they say, they're a little bit suspicious, but they say, okay, show us. The rat takes them to the grandmother's house. He climbs up the poles of the house and into the rafters, and using his teeth, he cuts loose a bundle that was in the rafters and drops it down. This is a giant plaster panel that was found about 5 years ago at the site of Tonina in Chiapas. There is a scene right here that is enlarged in this scene. This is, in fact, that rat. He's a very large rat. Okay? There's his head, here's his body, here's his hands, and he's holding in his hands what is a ball mold. Because balls made of solid latex rubber, when you lay them down, they flatten out. So the Maya had to have molds to keep the balls in the round. Here is the ball in the form of a head inside the ball mold, and here's the tying strings that the rat has unloosened from the rafters. We know he is first rat because that's what his name says. This is Kan Bach Cho, which is the precious first rat. This is Shaman of the North, so this is the precious first rat. Next time you catch one in your house, just remember that. Next pair. Okay, once the boys get the ball game equipment, they also become great ball players, start playing the ball game, disturb the lords of death, and they are called to the underworld. They go through, again like their fathers, a whole series of tests. The day begins with the ball game, in which they, in the Popol Vuh, it says they pay to a scoreless tie, so no one scores a point. Then each night, the lords of death put the boys into a house where they're given something they have to do, and if they don't do it, they'll be killed. Each morning, they come out having done what the lords say and defeating the traps. Finally, one day, the lords of death put them in the house of the Kamazots. This is the death bat, which is the vampire bat. These bats swoop down and tear the heads off of things. So the boys figure, well, we'll escape by getting inside of our blowguns. Don't ask anything about scale. So they hide in the blowguns. Well, the bats had some help from some ants because ants came along and put a torch at the end of the blowgun, and Hunahpu, like a dummy, sticks his head out to see if it's dawn. The bat swoops down, grabs the boy's head, and they carry it off and give it to the lords of death. Well, there's a story about, well, I love this one. I'll tell you the story. It's like Star Trek and Spock's brain. Okay? The surviving brother asks all of the animals to bring their food in. They do, and he chooses a pumpkin. And he takes the pumpkin and he carves it into the image of his brother's head, puts it on top, and the image I have is, that episode of Star Trek when Spock's running around like this. Okay. So the boys come out and play the next morning, and the ball that's thrown out to play is the older brother's head. That's this scene right here. This is the Lord of Death playing with the ball. That's the head of Hunahau as the ball. The younger brother figures out how to get the head back, but they have so embarrassed the Lords of Death, so humiliated them, that the boys realize they're going to be killed. For instance, this is a ball court from a marker from Copan. This player is Hunahau. There's the little dot for one. This is the glyph for Ahau. And this is the same death god that you see in this scene right here, playing him in the ball game. The boys know they're going to be killed, so they arrange with the local shaman to explain to the Lords of Death how to kill the boys in such a way that they can come back. It's a trick. They're called one morning to an oven where corn is roasted, and when they see there's fire in the oven, they know this is it. And like Daniel, they leap in to the fire. They die. The Lords of Death grind their bones up into powder and throw the powder in the river of the underworld. 5 days later, they emerge as fishmen. They then disguise themselves as great lords. Now, I'm in Oregon, and I don't know your state as well as I know mine, but they begin performing in the boondocks of Eugene. And then somebody in Portland figures out they're really good and invites them to Portland. And then the Tonight Show sees them in Los Angeles, and they get invited there, and finally they get a command performance before the president, which of course is the Lords of Death. Now, when they get there, they perform all of these magical dances. They burn houses that are not consumed. They kill and sacrifice people who get up and walk away in joy. They do miraculous dances. When they arrive before the command performance, the Lords of Death, you can just picture this as Mr. Clinton or Bob Dole, whichever one you like. In this state, you can think about Mr. Peckwood. Yeah? He says, okay, sacrifice that dog. So they cut the dog apart. Dog gets up, walks away, barks, wags its tail, and very happy. So, they choose someone from the audience, they sacrifice him. They cut the guy apart, said the magic word, the guy gets up, does a little click of the heels, walks away happily. Lords of Death look around and say, okay, burn the house. They burn the house, smoke goes up, there's flame everywhere, fire goes out, the house is still there. Lords of Death say, all right, sacrifice each other. So they go into the great dance of sacrifice in which they cut off each other's head and dismember their bodies, then get up and walk away. Well, by that time, Mr. Packwood can't stand it. He says, do it to me. And they don't put him back together again. Now, having defeated death, they tell all of the people who live in Xibalba, which is the other world, that they cannot anymore come to the world of human beings, or to the world, the middle world, except in the guise of disease and death and pestilence and war. But they cannot come in their flesh. They cannot appear to us as people. Then the boys go to resurrect their fathers, and in the Popol Vuh, what they say is, they dig up their father and their uncle's body, they bring them back to life, they are flesh, but the poor father and uncle have a little bit of brain damage. They can't name all their body parts. And because they can't do that, they can't come back to the middle world except as Mays. They can't come back in their human forms. So what happens is they leave their father and uncle in the ball court, and human beings must go to the ball court to worship the Maze God, who is the first father of the cosmos. The Dallas Cowboys didn't know they were doing that, but they were. Now, creation is about ready. I'm going to show you a slightly different version of the resurrection of First Father because the classic people give us much more detail. But before he gets resurrected, next pair, there's one last act that hero twins must do. In the third creation, in the third world, because for the Maya, in the Maya paradigm, we live in the fourth creation, not the fifth one, as the Aztecs believe. There is a great bird. This bird is a huge scarlet macaw who is so beautiful that he is sure that he is the sun. And he forces all of the people of the third creation, who are a little bit stupid, to worship him. Now, what the boys must do is they must get rid of this silly bird. Now, this is a pot that has the bird on it. Here's the face of the bird, here's a wing, there's the bird's tail. This is the same pot from the side. There's the bird's head, here's his wing, there's his tail. He is the avatar of the god Itzamna, and there's the old Itzamna riding on his back. Next pair. Now, the bird comes each day to land in a nansei tree. A nansei tree is a kind of crabapple tree. It's like peanut butter. If you grow up eating it, you like it. If it don't grow up eating, it smells like rotten meat. And gringos don't like it, but that's all right. The rest of the world thinks we're crazy for eating peanut butter. Okay, the bird here, you can see his face, there's his beak, his wings, etc., is coming down to land in the tree. Notice this, that the tree ends in alligator head, and here are the two twins. When the bird lands in the tree, the boys stand up and say, now listen, Mr. Bird, you're not the sun, and we know you're not the sun, and you're just faking it, and we would like for you to stop. The bird reaches over and rips out the arm of one of them. And there's the arm ripped out right there. Okay? The boys get mad and they say, now wait a minute, we're not going to let this happen. So, next pair. They hide in the woods and they shoot the bird. Here's the bird in all of his glory. This is a person, a monkey of the third creation, who is offering him in worship a fruit. And here's Hunahau, the hero twin, shooting the bird with his blood gun. This is the same scene. There's Hunahau, you can see the spots on his body, shooting at the bird. The pellet hits the bird's tooth, the tooth abscesses, and the bird is in terrible pain. Well, a couple of sorcerers who just happen to be the boy's grandparents come by and say, Mr. Bird, we can fix your problem. He says, I'll do anything. So they pull out his teeth, replace his teeth with white maize grains, and in the Popol Vuh it says he has a metal eye that they remove. In the classic period there wasn't any metal, so it's probably a jade eye. They remove his jeweled eyes, and everyone looks around and says, my God, that's just a bird. Why are we worshiping that? So with the false son of the third creation now in control and done away with, the boys are ready to begin creation. Next pair. Now, this is a pot which has three scenes. This is my drawing of a rollout of the pot that you see here. This has three scenes from this little episode where the Maize God's reborn. I will take you through each one. The first one is a scene right here, which you can see right there, I hope. What it is a giant snake. That snake represents the birth canal, and coming out of the snake is the Maize God in the moment of his rebirth. He is kissing a fish. I cannot explain why he kisses a fish. Except he's born into the primordial sea, maybe that's why. Now, Nikolai Gruber, my German friend who's an epigrapher, is the first one to suggest this interpretation. I told this to my partner, David Friedel, and David looked at me and he said, now wait a minute, babies are born face down. David's married to a medical anthropologist. He's also married to a woman who gave birth. He has not had any firsthand experience. And she says the baby, when it comes out, in the beginning is face down. But as soon as the shoulders get out, the baby rotates and becomes face up. And what you're seeing is the moment that the baby pops out of the birth canal. And so this is the birth of the Maize God as he comes out. Next pair. Now, when he gets out, the boys have to carry him where he's going to grow into an adult and be redressed. This is two halves of a rollout of an extraordinary pot that shows the scene. Here's the brother with the spots. This is Hunahau carrying a bundle. He's standing on top of a fish, if you're wondering what that weird thing is. Here's the other brother with the jaguar pelt. The brother has got a giant plate on his head, and there's the baby infant inside the plate. Now, we showed this to a Maya Chuchkahau, a mother-father, a shaman from the town of Chiniki, and he looked at that and said, you know what? When we give birth to babies, when our women have given birth to the babies, we must be very careful with the afterbirth. Because people who are enemies of your family can steal the afterbirth of the baby and do witchcraft with it. So it has to be very carefully buried. He said in our town, now they use other techniques in other Quiche towns, but he says in our town, what we do is we go to a cave that's very sacred to our families and where our ancestors have been. When we get to the cave, we put the afterbirth in a plate like that. The man must enter the cave in a duck waddle just like that. He walks forward and he brings, in the duck walk, he brings the pot to a hole that they've dug in the back of the cave. If the mother and father want another baby, they bury the plate face up. If the family does not want another baby, they bury it face down. So you're seeing a scene painted in the 7th century of a ritual that's still performed today by living Maya. Now, once the baby grows into an adult, he's born naked and he matures naked, and he's got to be dressed. And there are a whole set of scenes like this where the maize god that you see here is in the process of being dressed. He gets dressed by beautiful women. He's got a good life. Okay. Now, in this case, the woman is wearing a huipil. She's dressed. This is the shark or the shark in the shell that he wears on his waist, like his wife does, like Skeet does. Here, he's tying on his belt and he's getting himself adjusted. Next. Sometimes the women are naked. And here's a buxom young lady who is adjusting his kilt, and she has a partner on the other side that's tying on his belt. So he's getting all of these clothes together. Next pair. Here again, the lady is nude, and she is helping him tie on the jewelry around his upper arm. Once he's all dressed, he goes into a dance. This is called the Homel dance. Dancer. It's very famous. I know you can't see the details of it, but as he dances with a huge backpack, and there are always a dwarf with him. He can appear in twos and threes, and I'll explain to you why in a minute, but there's a different kind of dwarf with each dancer, and those dwarfs have been identified medically. Next pair. There's one scene that we don't understand. There's no reference to this in the Popol Vuh at all, but he appears to have to go and wake up some old men. And what you see here, these are three very important gods. We're going to find out who they are in a minute. This is a god who has a stingray spine through his nose. He is called the Old Stingray Paddler. This is an old god that has jaguar pelt all over him. He's called the Old Jaguar Paddler. And this fellow in the middle, here's a detail of it, who is pulling on his loincloth up between his legs, about to tie it onto his waist, is God Owl, because we don't know what his name was. Okay? He often will wear, now if you just remember, there's an eye and a beak and a feather there. He wears a headdress with an owl in it, and the dwarf has his staff. Now these three old men, old gods, if you will, that have been woken up, and you can see right here, Mace God's dancing on top of this old guy. It seems to be a violent action. They apparently don't want to go, and he makes them go. They may be Shibalbans that don't want to cooperate. We're not real sure. But these guys are going to be major actors in creation. Next pair. And the reason is that the paddlers row a canoe. That's why they're called the paddlers. Here's the canoe right here. This is the old Jaguar Paddler. This is the old Stingray Paddler. You can see their long paddles going down into the water where the Maize God was reborn. And here's the Maize God. Here's the old Jaguar Paddler with a seed sack on his chest being carried to the place of creation when he's ready. Next pair. This is a very famous drawing from a pair of bones from burial 116 at Tikal, which shows this scene. Here's the canoe. There are a pair of bones, so it's a duplicated scene. These little rectangular stacks in these shells represent the surface of water. The canoe goes along being paddled in front by an old god with a jaguar head, the old Jaguar Paddler, and an old god with a stingray pine. There's the Stingray Paddler. The two old gods who just woke up are his paddlers. Here he is in the center. He's got the heel of his hand to his head saying, "Woe is me." Now, the reason why we know, we call it the woe is me expression, is because it's always associated with death or something like that. The passengers in the boat are a shaggy dog, a parrot, a spider monkey, and an iguana. Now, what we have learned is that the night that this event occurs corresponds to this pattern in the sky, and this canoe is in fact the Milky Way. Okay, so this is the first sky pattern I'm showing you. I'm going to show you many more. Next pair. In the other pair of bones, the canoe sinks. And here's the canoe sinking. Here's the Stingray Paddler. There's the woe is me, old god. Here's the monkey. There's the iguana. Here's the parrot. In the opposite one that sinks, here is the old Jaguar Paddler. There's the Maize God. Here's the parrot. There's the shaggy dog. The monkey and the iguana are in the water screaming. Well, if you look at the Milky Way, in 2-hour intervals, as it just moves through the sky through a 4-hour period, here's the canoe. Their canoe begins to sink. There it sank. This is sink, sank, sunk. Good. Next pair. Now, there's another form of the canoe that's from another bone in that tomb. I know this is hard to see, but this canoe has a crocodile mouth on the end of the canoe. Here is the monkey. Here's the Maize God. There's the iguana. This is the tail of the monkey right there. And the paddler back here is Itzamna. I know it's hard to see, But just remember, there's the god's name right there, named as Itzamna. This canoe is the same vision of the Milky Way, and if you look at this black cleft in the Milky Way, it's actually the head of the crocodile. And Itzamna, as the paddler, is sitting right here on Gemini. I want you to remember that. Next pair. Here is an incredible eccentric flint from the Dallas Art Museum that shows this crocodile canoe diving in the sinking form down into the primordial sea, carrying the soul of the Mace God with it. This is a shell pectoral from the American Museum of the High Foundation in New York, which has now become the new Smithsonian collection. Here is the old Stingray Paddler. There's the Stingray. Here's his canoe. There's his paddle. And he carries the rabbit in the boat because this is the position where the ecliptic passes through the Milky Way, and the rabbit can be in exactly that position as the moon. Next pair. Now, in addition to the Milky Way material, we have begun, through the work of many people, to identify how the Maya identified constellations. The first piece of work in this that gave us a clue was Floyd Lounsbury's analysis of this picture of a judgment scene after a battle in room 2 of Temple 1 of Bonampak. 10 years ago, when Mary Miller was doing her dissertation, Floyd suggested that these 4 cartouches up here at the top were pictures of the constellations in the morning sky just on the day that this activity took place. He did the calculations and found out that the turtle is here. There's some peccaries there. I know you can't see the peccaries, but you'll see them better in a minute. And there are 2 figures there. This is a small map, I'll show you a larger one in a minute, of what the sky looked like on that morning. The turtle, according to 16th century, 17th century, 19th century, and modern Maya, the constellation of Orion is Ak the turtle. It's called the Ak-Ek, the turtle stars. The same information tells us that Ak is also the word for peccary, so that Ak-Ek is also the name of the constellation of Gemini, but Gemini is a peccary rather than a turtle. Next pair. This is a detail of the turtle from the Bonampak drawings, with the stars on the back of the turtle being the belt of Orion, and here is the herd of peccaries. We used to think they're copulating peccaries, and they still may be copulating peccaries in the constellation of Gemini. Now, this identification all of a sudden made sense with all sorts of pots we've got. For instance, this is a very, very famous pot, if you'll change this side right here, in which there is a scene of the primordial sea of water over 4 legs that are rendered as peccary heads. Now, peccary is the wild pig, or a habali. Here's the little peccary's ears. There's its eyes. I'll show you a detail of him in a minute. On top of the pot's a canoe. And there's this little guy paddling along in this canoe. On top of his head is a 4-petaled flower that identifies him as the sun. So what you are seeing is the sun riding in a canoe along the ecliptic as it passes through the constellation of Gemini. Next pair. Here is the paddler. This, you can see just half of it here, but this is the sunflower. He's already caught a fish he's carrying on his back. And here's the peccary. There's the little piggy's ear. There's the little piggy's eye. Here's the little piggy's mouth. And there's the little piggy's flat nose. You can call him Porky, if you like. Next pair. Now, all of a sudden, all sorts of scenes that we've had for a very long time and that didn't make any sense ever before begin to make sense. We have pictures in pots, a whole bunch of them now, that show the old god Itzamna riding a peccary. We had no idea why this old god would want to ride peccaries. Here's the constellation of the peccaries in Gemini, next pair. And here's the canoe, and when Itzamna is paddling the canoe, he sits in the middle of the constellation of Gemini. That's why he rides a peccary. Next pair. No, sorry. Go back on, yes, go forward on that one. We also had other scenes like this. This is a pot which we had no way to interpret that Michael Coe published in 1973 in My Scrivener's World. Here's the peccary. Here's the sun on the back of the peccary, and there's a snake above the peccary. The glyph here says peccary of the sky. We had no idea. What's a sky peccary? Well, now we know. The snake is the ecliptic. There's the line of the ecliptic. The peccary is the constellation of Gemini, and the sun's on his back because this is a picture of the sun passing through that area of the sky, through that part of the ecliptic. Next pair. Now, that turtle is the belt of Orion. And that all of a sudden makes enormous sense out of this scene on this stunning codex-style pot. This is one of about 10 pots that we now have that show the moment of the maize god's rebirth. Here is the giant carapace of the turtle. Here is our water lilies. In Mayan languages, the word for water lily is nab. That is also the word for the sea, for the ocean, and the primordial sea. Here's the head of the turtle. There's an old god with water lilies on his head coming out of the back of the turtle. The carapace of the turtle has been cracked open. The younger twin, or the twin with the spots on his body, one Ahau, one Lord, is speaking to his father, saying, "Come on, Daddy, get up, get up, get up." The other brother, with the pelt on his arms, is pouring water into the crack to water his father as the maize is reborn. Here's his father coming out, and there's his name, One, and this is the head of the maize god, Hunau. One maize is his name. Okay, next pair. This scene is right here in the constellation of Orion. There's the belt, that's the turtle. So the maize god's place of rebirth is the constellation of Orion. I just wanted to show, I love to see these turtles. I never knew what turtles were before. Now we do. This is an early classic turtle of the turtle head giving out Itzamna. Next pair. Okay, now the word for peccary is ak, and the word for turtle is ak. So the Maya used this homophony to make a play on words. And here's a shell that Michael Coe also published of a peccary with the same dot on its back. The back of the peccary is cracked open because this is the cracking open of the ak, whether it's a peccary or turtle. Here's the maize god coming out. The maize god has a paint pot and a brush because the creator in the Maya paradigm is an artist. Just remember that, you scientists. It's an artist, okay? And here's this image superimposed over the top of Orion. It's the same area of the sky. Next pair. And these are two lovely slides that just appeared. I took this one 15 years ago, not knowing what I was seeing. This is a caiman floating in a municipal dirty pond in the middle of a little town called Gutierrez Zamora. The caiman was captured from the Nautla River and put here. The Maya understood the turtle to be floating in the primordial sea. You can see the brown gook of the primordial sea. The scoots on his back are the mountains, and here's the turtle having climbed up on the back of the caiman, the sun itself. This is a picture of modern Lacandone. These are the only non-Christian Maya left. This is modern Lacandone constellations. This is the belt of Orion, and what they call it is a peccary, and the star of Rigel is the baby, is the peccary baby. So today's Lacandones still have the same constellation names. Next. Now, one last piece of evidence, which is, or information which is really neat about the story, is the turtle doesn't come with a crack in the back. Somebody's got to crack it open. And we have a series of pots in which we find out who the turtle cracker is. Here are little bitty one-man canoes. Here's the Jaguar Paddler, here's the Stingray Paddler. The Stingray Paddler is bringing the turtle to the shell, to the place of creation. This god is standing in his canoe overlooking the turtle shell after it's been cracked open. This is the maize god standing in the crack. This god is identified by the diadem he wears and by his ear flare as the famous god Chak. Chak is the god of lightning, and this stone that he's got in his hand like this to bring down on top of the turtle is a lightning bolt. So what we know in this scene and in this scene is the turtle shell of Orion is cracked open by lightning. Now, you Oregonians don't have to respect lightning very much. If you want to find out about it, come to Texas or go to Mexico, because in the tropics and in southern latitudes, lightning is a fierce, fierce thing to watch as it strikes in the great thunder and monsoon rains of the tropics. Next pair. Now, once the maize god gets born, that's just the beginning of the story. Once he's reborn and he's brought back to life, he's got to create the world. And what we have from the classic period is a series of texts that show us what they did on creation, and we can now tie these to images. This is the stela of a king whose name was Boots Tilwe, or Smoking Danta, who was the king of a site called Quirigua. Think of him as Bill Clinton. Better yet, Ronald Reagan. This king wanted to show that his charter for religious power started with the creation. It's Ronald Reagan, not Bill Clinton. Okay? So what he does is he starts out on this side giving an account of what happens in creation. And this is the most detailed account we have. So you should like that fellow. He's a bit ugly, but he's a really important Maya. The first part of the text, which I do not have in this picture, is simply the long count. Then he gives us the day, which in Maya is 4 Hawait Kunku. In our calendar, that is August the 13th, 3114 BC. Don't worry about the BC date, just remember August the 13th. The next glyph reads Hal, these little cross bands right here. Hal means to make manifest or make visible. This glyph is Toba. Toba means an image, so was made visible an image. This is what the image was. It is of 1, 2, 3. This is the glyph for stone, and this glyph means something like lifting or placing. So this was made visible, the image of 3 stone settings. And then they tell us what each of those settings were. This glyph is Tapwa. Tap is a glyph that means to set something upright in the ground. It's what you do when you erect a stela. This is the glyph for stone. So it said, was erected the stone. Here are the actors. This is the old jaguar god. This is the old stingray god. These are the 2 paddlers. So when they brought the canoe to the place of creation, they put a stone in place. Then they say to us that this happened at, and they tell us where it happened. It's at a place called Nahochan, and that translates as either lady or house 5 sky. And then this is the eye of a jaguar. This is a picture of a throne, and that's the glyph for stone again. So this happens at a house 5 sky, jaguar throne stone. Then they tell us what happened with the second stone. It was erected, the stone. Here's the name of the god that did it. We do not know who it is. And it tells us that it happened at the earth partition. So we have one happening in the sky, the next one happens on the earth, and this is a snake throne stone. Finally, we get to the third one, and they says, and then it happened the stone setting by Itzamna. This is the guy who rides the peccary, and is the third canoer that brings the Mace God to the place of creation. He sets up a knob, or an ocean throne stone. So now we not only have 3 stones, but we have the heavens, the earth, and the ocean. Then they tell us that all of this is Uti, it happened at, and the name of the place where it happens, this is Cha, which means to lie down or recline. I wouldn't mind doing that myself right now. This is the glyph for sky, so it's Chachan, or lying down sky, and this is Yash, which means either blue or first. Here are the 3 stones, and that is Nav, which means place. Now what I want you to notice is that the 3 stones are in a triangular arrangement. Anyone who's ever been in a Maya house that still uses an old hearth knows that Maya women make a hearth in the center of their house out of 3 stones, and these stones are kept for generations. They're passed on from mother to daughter in 3 stones set in this triangular arrangement. The fire is lit by putting the kindling in between the sides of the stones, in between them. Then today it'll be a metal round komal, and earlier it was a clay one. It's put on top of that, and then you put the coffee pot on one side, you make the tortillas, and you heat them on part of it, and you make your soup, and you do everything on top of the fire. That is a Maya hearth. And so what we've got here is the place that this happens is the first hearth of the world. It's where the first fire of creation is made. But I want you to understand also that the metaphor here is drawn out of the life of a woman. This is the most common thing. When a woman makes the breakfast for her children in the morning, she gets up before dawn, she goes to the hearth, she lights a fire in the hearth, she grinds the corn, she shapes the corn mixes it and makes it into dough. She shapes the dough into tortillas, she puts the tortillas on the fire, and she makes food for her family. That is the act of creation. Every woman, Maya woman, does it in the morning when she wakes up. Then they tell us that this is the completion of 13 cycles, and finally they tell us who did all of this. This is Ukahi, it was done by the Akshanav, and the person that's done it is called 6 Sky Lord. Now I just want you to remember that, 6 Sky Lord. Next pair. Now, here is the world's greatest chip and dip bowl. In the center of it is the Homul dancer. This is the Mace God with his dwarf. The 3 dip bowls are the 3 stones of creation. We also know from the seals of the highlands of Guatemala, from the Popol Vuh, and from all modern Quiche peoples that the star here, which is Alnitak, the bottom star of the belt of Orion, this bottom star of Orion, which is Safe, and this one, which is Rigel, are called today the three stones of the hearth. This cosmic hearth is that part of Orion. Next pair. Not only that, but we have a picture from the Madrid Codex of the turtle, which is the belt, with the three stones on its back. So there's really no doubt. It's hanging from a cord. This is the ecliptic. This is the sun passing through the ecliptic, and the cords are here because Orion is below the ecliptic. And the most common arrangement of architecture known from Maya, very, very widely used, is the triangular arrangement. When the Maya use this, they are creating the cosmic hearth. They are centering the world. Next pair. This is Mirador. This is one of the earliest archaeological cities we have, and notice the three buildings. Everywhere where you look, 1, 2, 3, they're all set up in this triangular arrangement. Now, change this one. We also have pictures of the actual throne settings. This is the rollout of a pot that is now in the Chicago Art Institute. We know its creation because it says so. This is for Hawe Tunku, the day of creation. This is Tsaka, which means it was placed in order. This is Et Utan, black is its center. The center is black because the sky is still lying down. No one's lifted it up yet to give light to the world, so it's in blackness. What you see then was placed in order, black at its center, God of sky, God of earth, and then there are a whole series of other gods who are named here. These are the gods. In the Christian tradition, only one being creates the world. In the Mayan tradition, it's done by committee. And here's the committee, okay? Now, if you go to the other part of the scene, you will see that this is a throne. It has a jaguar pelt on it. This is the jaguar throne. And sitting on top of it is the old man with the owl in his head. This is the guy that was putting the loincloth on, and he's sitting here happily smoking away at a cigar because he is a shaman. Now, we also have this picture, if you'll change this one. This pot is a pot that shows the place that's called Nahochan, or the first 5 sky place, or the house 5 sky place. We know that so because they tell us right here that that's the name of this place. Okay, the glyphs tell us that. What we have is we have a scene with blackness behind it because the sky is not lifted up yet. There are 3 beings here who are, I don't know what they're doing, sitting around talking. But what they're sitting around talking in is a series of twisted cords. And you can see the twisted cords have a snake on the end of it. Those cords today among the Maya are called Kushan Sum. These are the living cords, and these are the umbilicus cords. Today, anywhere that you would go in Yucatan, if you spoke Yucatec or pretty good Spanish, you could sit down with the old men in the villages and you could ask them about a myth that's everywhere in Yucatan. The Yucatecs say that once upon a time, their leaders were tied to heaven, to the Milky Way, which they call the White Road or the Sakbe, by a Kushan Sum, by a living cord, an umbilicus. When the Spanish came, the Spanish cut that cord and the blood ran out, and the Maya ever since have been disconnected from their sacred source of power. The Quetzal Maya, who are the Maya of Yucatan who rebelled in the caste wars, say that at the end of the millennia, a great war will start. They say that this war will be fought between all of the ethnic groups of the world, that it will begin with machines and rifles and tanks, but eventually all of the machines will be destroyed. They say Bosnia is the beginning. They say that when this last battle is fought with the machetes, they will win. When they win, there will be a Maya who rules again. When that happens, they say, this cord is coiled up under the great ball cord at Chichen. It will come out through a cave, exit in the great cenote, and rise again and connect the Maya once again to the White Way. Okay? Now, I thought for a long time that's just a modern story, a way of the Maya have of explaining the conquest. But here's the Kushan Sum as it was drawn at 700 AD, and this is a stela from Isapa at 200 BC. This is the picture I've shown you before of the hero twin with his arm ripped out. This is the great tree at the center of the world. This is the bird in the top of a pole. Here is the snake-headed cord that goes from the bird down to the tree. This is the Kushan Sum at 200 BC. This is a very, very ancient concept indeed. Now, in addition, what I want you to see here is that this great crocodile tree is also the Milky Way, and this cleft in the part of the Milky Way is not only the alligator head of the canoe, it's also the alligator head at the base of this particular tree. And we're going to see how this works later. Next pair. Okay, now this is the group of the cross at Palenque, And as this is a later addition, so if you see the arrangement here, we have the cosmic hearth again. In the tallest north building, Chan Bak-lum, who was, we'll let him be a Bill Clinton, also decided to say that his claim to power starts with God and creation. And he, like the king of Quirigua, starts out his lineage history by recounting creation. I'm going to show you several of the phrases from that recounting and give you the second act of creation. There is a distance number, an amount of elapsed time of 2 days, 9 months, and 1 year. This moves us from August the 13th, 3114 BC, to February the 5th, 3112 BC. So we move from August the 13th to February the 5th. Here it says, this is after was made visible, Owa, the image of the lying down sky, the first hearth. This is the glyph that records the action, and this is the name of the man who did it. This is Hunalge, this is the maize god. And the action he did is recorded with a little dog head that reads Och, which means to enter. This is Ta, into, and this is the glyph for sky again. So he entered into the sky. We have a picture of this, next pair. It's this pot right here. What we have here is a text that has the Och Chan right here, entering the sky. This is the name of the bird, Itzamna. And what you see that the bird is doing is the bird is landing in the tree. So to enter the sky is to land in that tree. Now, I had this wonderful time with David Friedel. David Friedel, for many years, asked me what that scorpion's doing there. And I said, I don't know, David, there's lots of scorpions in the forest. And David said, now, don't say that to me. It's got to be something else. And then a little bird of another epigrapher whispered in his ear, there's a scorpion in the Maya zodiac. And David said, well, that's got to be the scorpion in the Maya zodiac. And I said, nah, that can't be. Argued for 2.5 months and finally had to accept it. Then I had to go to the Paris Codex where the zodiac is and figure out where it is. Well, it ends up their scorpion is our scorpion. Next pair. In the zodiac of the Paris Codex, Sinan, which is the word for scorpion, is the name of the constellation of Scorpius. Okay? I'll never forget the day I went and my friend Johannes Wilbert told me, always go to the natural environment to find the source of the model. And I remember sitting at my desk saying, okay, Sheila, listen to what Johannes says, go get a star book. I went and got a star book, opened it up, found out what the sky looks like when Scorpius is at its highest point, and lo and behold, this is what the Milky Way looks like. And then in that instant, I realized the Milky Way is the tree. The scorpion is in the constellation, and the tree itself is the rising of the Milky Way. Now, last summer, John McGee, who is an ethnographer who has worked with the Lacandon for 20 years, went back into Naha and spoke with Old Chankin, the oldest and the most knowledgeable of all the Lacandon. Old Chankin didn't want to talk at first, but when they started telling him Muskegee Creek stories from southern Alabama, Old Chankin said, now wait a minute, those guys aren't telling the story right. And it ends up that the Lacandon call this constellation Loch, which is their word for scorpion. They call this fat part of the Milky Way the trunk and the roots of the tree, the buttresses of a great ceiba, and this is the tree. So even the Lacandon today say this is the tree. Next pair. Okay. Now, the text then goes back and tells us in a couplet construction. Now, Maya literature loves to use couplets. In couplets, you say something one way, and then you come back and you say it again in a slightly different way. In the Bible, these are called chiasmus very often, okay? The second time it's repeated, you have a date. This is the name of the day on 13 end of Mole in our time. This is February the 5th, 3112 BC. This glyph is hoi. It means to dedicate or bless a building or to circumambulate something. This glyph down here is Uchul Kaaba, which means is its holy name. That tells us that these three glyphs are the name of this object that is dedicated. And this tells us what the object is. This is Yotot Shaman. Yotot is the home of, and this is Shaman north. So this is something in the north, and probably the north sky. Here's the name of what this is. We know from the inscriptions of this temple that this glyph, which is the number 6 sky, plus this glyph, which is null, meaning place after it, is the name of that cross. It's the name of the tree. Its name is Wakachan. Wak is the word for six, but it's also a verb, which means to lift something up with your hands like this. So the Wakachan is not only six sky, it's the raised up sky. This is the act of the gods lifting the skies away from the earth and separating and making space for light and the sun and the planets. Okay? And the way they do it is they erect the center axis of the world, which is the great world tree. Next pair. Here it is. This is the tree as they represented it with Scorpius at the bottom. Here are the buttress roots. This is the natural model. This is a ceiba tree at Tikal. Here are the buttress roots. Here are the upper part of the tree. And you not only make canoes from that tree, but this tree flowers between January the 15th and February the 15th. It flowers at exactly the time that the tree is raised. Next pair. Furthermore, this is the image of the tree superimposed on the Milky Way. This is the great sarcophagus of Palenque. Now, this is probably the most famous of all Maya objects. I always love to make a joke of it. The con man, Eric von Daniken, encouraged that this is a chemical rocket coming from another star. There's the flame. Here is the capsule. There's the king, or the astronaut turning he's turning the instruments, and here's the rocket. Well, we've known for a long time that's bullshit. This is a picture of Pakal in the instant he dies. He is poised in the position of a fall. We know he's falling because his jade is flipped up, his loincloth is flipped up, and it's like if I were to jump off the stage, what would happen to the flaps of my coat? They flip up, right? Actually, they stay in place and I jump out from under them. But that's irrelevant. If you wore a long loincloth and you were Maya and you jumped off of a stage, you knew what happened to things when you fall. So here he falls. This, which was supposed to be the capsule, in fact, is a great serpent head with its maw open. It's a serpent that's made of bone and it's called the white bone snake, and it is the entry to the other world. And he is falling down the great axis. Around the axis of the world is the double-headed serpent, which you can see here, and that corresponds to the ecliptic. Now, the glyph on the side of the sarcophagus for the action that Pakal is undergoing is written Och Be. Och means to enter the road. Och means to enter. Be is the word for road. The name of the Milky Way was either Sak Be, the white road, or it was Rube Shibalba, the road to Shibalba. What he is doing is he is falling down the road to Shibalba. This tomb is oriented with this to the south, that to the north. That's exactly the orientation of that map. This is what the sky looked like on August the 34th, 684, which is the night he died. So what you are seeing here is not only a metaphorical rendition of death, it's a picture of the sky. It's a map of the sky on the night he died. Okay, this is the Wakachan. This is another picture with the double-headed serpent bar to reinforce that it's the ecliptic. This is from a pot from Tikal. I know you can't see it very well, but there is a double-headed serpent bar here that corresponds exactly to the ecliptic. So the double-headed serpent bar is the ecliptic, and the beings that come out of the mouth of the snake are planets and other movable phenomena. Next pair. Now, these are the constellations as we now know them. Unfortunately, in the Paris Codex, two of them are eroded, so we don't know what they were, and there are in total 13. Capricorn is a jaguar, Sagittarius is a rattlesnake, Scorpius is a scorpion, Libra was a shark, Virgo was the god Chak. Cancer is the death god. The area around Gemini and partially into Taurus is the turtle. Taurus itself is a bird. Aries is a turkey, and Pisces is a bat. And if you're born in any of the other signs, you're a blank. Next pair. Now, the other name of this house is this glyph right here. It has the number bars 5, 1, 2, 3 for 8. This is the glyph Na, which means structure, and this is the glyph for Suk, which means partitions. It is a house of 8 partitions. This is a tomb from the site of Rio Sul that tells us exactly what these 8 partitions are. This text is written right there. It reads, on this day, Muka, he was buried in, this is 6 sky, and the little glyph over the top is the glyph for cloud. So he was born in raised up cloudy sky place. In Raised Up Cloudy Sky Place, this is the name of the guy that was buried. On the east wall, we have the glyphs for east. On the south wall, we have the glyph for south. On this wall is the glyph for north. On this wall is the glyph for south. I'm sorry, this is west, that's south. I'll get it straight. The four of these 8 partitions are the cardinal directions. But you can see in the corner right here and right there are other glyphs. Those are the names of the 4 corners of the world. So the house of 8 partitions are the great cardinal directions and the 4 corners of the world. Next pair. Now, the last part that I want to show you is that there is a position of the Milky Way in which the Milky Way rims the Earth, the horizon, and there's none over the top of you. The Maya called this the Equi, and they saw it as a transformational opening into the other world. Here, this drawing that's superimposed over the sky map here comes from a peccary skull at Copan. I discovered to my chagrin, I do not have a photograph of that peccary skull, but here are the peccaries of Gemini right there. There's a jaguar and a clown right here, and these are the death gods that are always in the south. So when you go through this particular configuration, you are going through a point of transformation. Next. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you star maps of what happens every 2 hours in the year 690 on these 2 creation days. I chose the year 690 AD because that's the year the group of the cross at Palenque was dedicated. I think that the myth and its attachment to the sky was probably done very much earlier by the Olmec around 1000 BC. In all of the books that we have, both of the Yucatec and of the Quiche, who are the 2 peoples for whom we have myths of creation, the word for to create the world is the same word as to dawn. So that in the Maya conception, when the sun brightens the world in the morning and appears, that is to them a little creation. And so that in these 2 nights, the climactic moment is the moment of dawn. Now, the reason for telling you that I think this was said in Olmec times is because precession over the 1500 years between when I think the myth was set and when the Maya were using it in the 7th and 8th centuries is a precession of 1 constellation. So it's not what I'm going to show you is not going to come precisely to zenith, but it's close enough so that I think the Maya of the classic period wouldn't have worried about it. Now, the other thing is that when you look at star maps, you always must remember that west in a star map is on the right side and east is on the left side. This is the north, that's the south. And also, as I begin telling you, if you're very close to dawn, the Milky Way will disappear and you will only see the very, very brightest stars. Now this is the first night. This is August the 12th. This should also be August the 12th. Sometimes my computer messed up on me. I didn't give it the right offering, okay? Actually, I'm the one that put those letters in, so it's me. This is at 6:31 on August the 12th, 690. This is at sunset. Now at sunset, you're not going to see the Milky Way, but you will recognize Scorpius. It's right there. And most of all, you will see very clearly in the north the stars of the Big Dipper. Dennis Tedlock says the Big Dipper is that terrible bad bird. 2 hours later at 8 a.m., the Milky Way, or the tree, begins to tilt, and notice that the big bird, the Big Dipper, has moved towards the horizon. Next pair. Now this is, I lost 10 o'clock. So this is a fake 10 o'clock. Which is why it's not progressing exactly like it should. But you can see the Big Dipper has moved towards the horizon, almost disappeared. We've got more angle on the tree. By midnight, the alligator tree is up and the bird has fallen into the earth. The bird is gone. That's the destruction of the false sun. Next pair. By 2 o'clock, you move into the canoe. By 4 o'clock in the morning, the canoe begins to tilt. Here's the first hearth, there's the turtle, here's the peccary as it begins to rise up towards the zenith. Next pair. At dawn, here is the place of creation. That turtle is right here. The peccaries are right there. So at dawn, Orion has come almost to the zenith. In 1000 BC, it was right directly on the zenith. Now at dawn, you would see Orion, because Orion, like Scorpius and like the Big Dipper, have the largest concentration of first magnitude stars, and you can quite literally see it almost until the minute the sun is above the horizon. Now, this is the setting of the 3 stones, the rebirth of the maize god, and the lighting of first fire in the cosmic hearth. Now we move, next pair, to February the 5th. This is starting on February the 4th, and we'll move forward to the dawn of February the 5th. We start out with the sun, with the Milky Way and Orion in the same position that it was at dawn on August the 13th, because these 2 days are reciprocal opposites of each other. This is at sunset. By 8 o'clock, Orion has crossed the zenith. It's crossed the highest point in the sky. The Pleiades are called by the Quiche the 400 boys. This bad bird had 2 sons, one of whom was named Sipak Na. He was a great crocodile and a very bad character who killed 400 boys by collapsing a house on them. They say that the Pleiades are the 400 boys and the Milky Way is the beam of the house, and watch what happens. Next pair. Here, the Pleiades begin sinking towards the horizon. There's the great beam of the house chasing them. There is the 3 stones of creation, the turtle, there's the peccaries. Now the boys done sunk. They gone. Here is this is at midnight with the 3 hearths just beginning to go down below the horizon. Next pair. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, it moves through the equi. This is the moment of transformation. This is the moment of change and of dreaming. By 4 o'clock in the morning, the entire eastern horizon brightens and the world tree begins to lift up out of that eastern horizon. Next pair, and by dawn, the tree is erect over the world. At dawn, the tree is lifted up and the sky and the earth are separated. Now, in the remaining part of my time, I want you to understand that this is not dead. There are people all over the Yucatan, all over the Maya area, who still celebrate Christian traditions that have in their fundamental identity this very ancient worldview, just as our science has in its foundation, surely, much of the thinking of the Greeks. This is an example of what are called the voladores, the flyers. You may be aware of the famous ones from El Tajín in the north, but there are 2 villages, 2 towns in Guatemala who still have flyers. They say that this pole is the center axis of the world. They have 4 flyers who tie themselves to the pole by their legs, and they fly a perfect flight as the rope gets longer and longer and longer and brings them down to Earth, will make 13 circuits around the pole. There are 13 constellations in the Maya zodiac. Next pair. These are crosses. This is a cross from the town of San Juan Chamula in the highlands of Guatemala. It is in front of a church. It looks like a Christian cross. It is not a Christian cross. It is a Christian cross, but it ain't a Christian cross. You remember the yashte, the great saber tree that I showed you? The name of that tree is yashte. It means either green tree or first tree. All Maya crosses are painted green because they are sabas. The tree that is on the sarcophagus at Palenque has flowers at the ends of all of the branches. Here is flowers on each one of these trees. The Chamulas call these the flowers of the hand, the flowers of the head. There are flowers of the feet below the pine right here, or these are actually bromeliads, and this is the heart flower. This is a living being, and for the Maya, crosses like this open up portals into the other world where they can talk to their ancestors, and in Guatemala, to deities or saints that are called mundos. These are the spirits of the earth that really decide whether or not you're going to have good crops. This is a cross I photographed last year on the road from Copan to Guatemala City, near the town of Hocotan. I've passed this thing for 10 years and never paid attention to it. This time, I finally got out. It's a small cross erected by a Chorti shaman to help bless the fields, and it's the place to call out the ancestral dead, to bring out the duendes, to bring the earth into agreement with the farmers. It is completely covered with tobacco leaves. I thought for a long time they used tobacco leaves because in the Copan Valley they grow Virginia tobacco. Nope. Tobacco is the sacred food of the gods. It's the most sacred plant of all Mesoamericans, and it's the tobacco is what that god El was smoking. So it's covered with tobacco because this is a transformational cross that leads you into the other world. Next. These are the most wonderful ones. In Pagal's sarcophagus, if any of you have been there, you will know that there is a hollow stone tube that leads from the floor above in the temple all the way down the steps to ground level, and below ground level, it enters the crypt where the sarcophagus is, goes under the lid of the sarcophagus, and into the coffin where the body is. Archaeologists called it a sarcoduct. It's where the descendants of Pakal could call out his spirit and talk to him in bloodletting rituals. This is the western burial ground of the Chamula. It's a place called Romaria. Across the crest of the hill are 30 or 40 of these great giant green crosses dressed with pine and with bromeliads. Below the crosses at their feet are the the graves of the ancestral dead, each one with its little flower cross. These planks on top are not the remnants of coffins. They are planks that the Chamulas put on top of the tombs of their families and say that they are doors. On the Day of the Dead, the Chamulas go to this graveyard with joy, with food, with drink, with radios. You can see plastic spoons when you're there and paper plates, and they have a picnic. And they open the doors in a very careful ritual. They call to their ancestors come out and share a meal with them. They're doing what Popol did 1,000 years ago. Here is a Chak table that my friend David Friedel photographed less than 3 years ago in the town of Yashuna. The shaman, or the Khmen, who created the table is this man right there. That's Don Pablo. This was a ceremony during a time of drought to bring rain. This table is a model of the universe that exactly matches the group of the cross made in 690 AD. It is oriented to the 4 directions. This is east, west, north, and south. In this case, there are 6 legs and there are 4 bows, but Don Pablo's made tables with 6 bows and 4 tables. 6 is wak. The word for 4 is kan. It's also homophonous with the word for snake, and it is homophonous with sky. This is a 6 sky. This is a wakchan. It's the same thing as the name of the cross on that tablet at Palenque. There are 4 little corn plants at the 4 corners. That's the maize god being reborn. This arch right here creates an arbor, or the arch of heaven. In the center of it, he drops a cord, and in the middle there is a round hoop that's called the Shpeten Khan, the island or the disk of the sky. From the central axis, he takes out 4 long little lassos or pieces of vine, which he calls Shtab Khan. These are the cords of the sky. It's the Kushan Sum. This is the living cord, or the umbilicus that you saw in that pot from the 7th century. From the Shpeten Khan here, he hangs 13 boards. There are 13 constellations in the Maya zodiac. When he is ready to ask the gods, will they please accept his offerings, he pours in maize gruel. That's the flesh of human beings in the maize god. If during the night the maize gruel separates out clearly so that the water and the maize are finally separated, that's a signal the Chaks will accept his prayers. If it's cloudy, they do not have the ceremony. If the gods will accept the offerings, then all of the people of the town bring maize dough, and Don Pablo makes a huge tamale that's at least 1.5 meters wide and 1 meter high. That's the maize god. Then he breaks that bread apart because it must first become a great community thing called the crusois, the bread of the cross. But the cross is, yes, the Christian cross, it's also the center axis of the world. He then breaks it apart and he makes it into chickenwa and iguanawa and deerwa and sometimes bimbowa. Only if you know that's a joke. But here, for instance, is a pot with the bread in it and there are chicken feet on top of it. That's chickenwa, that's chicken bread. He also puts in the top all sorts of offerings in the top. Then, when the table is ready, he opens a portal. That portal is called Uhol Gloria. Translated into English, that's the glory hole. Okay? What he brings through the glory hole is what he calls Yeats Khan. Yeats is a word that means sweat, semen. It means the melted candle wax on a candle. It's honey from a nest, from a bee's nest. It's copal or resin oozing from a tree. It's the dew on the morning grass. It is nectar in the flowers. My friend David Friedel calls it the cosmic ooze. It's all the things that ooze from the world, but those that carry the living substance of the universe with them. What the Khmen asks for is the Yeats Khan, this cosmic ooze from the sky, which is, of course, rain. Next pair. This is an altar in a Yucatecan house. This is just a family altar, nothing special. Notice that it has the cross dressed in flowers. In the 4 corners, it has fire, and the ooze of the candle, that melted wax, is the eats. It has bowls made of clay, and in are chickens, right? They didn't have chicken pre-Columbian times, those would have been turkeys or quail. In the middle are the offering of the tortillas, that's the flesh of God. Right? This is a table that could have been in any house 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 years ago. Finally, this is the famous town of Momostenango in the highlands of Guatemala. This town has been made very, very famous by Barbara Tedlock, who went there and as a graduate student and became friends with a man, an Ahki, named Andres Chilo. The Maya are very wonderful people. They do not ever missionize. They do not ever try to convince anybody else in the world that their way of understanding the world is better than anybody else's. But if anyone comes and asks, they will share with anybody in the world who asks. And so Andres Chilo agreed to teach Barbara if she would do what it took to learn. And so she did. For 2 or 3 years, she stayed with him and she learned how to be a Maya Ahki, and she is today. She is a daykeeper. She wrote in her book all of this, and in that she describes the cosmology of the town. There is a great mountain to the north, there's another one to the south, there's one to the east, there's one to the west. The north mountain is the four corners of the sky, south mountain is the four corners of the earth. I never can remember what the east and the west mountains are, but around these mountains are 9 shrines. They're called 1 place, 2 place, 3 place, 4 place, etc. When a shaman or a ahki is to be initiated, he must go on the day 1 monkey, which will be on May the 28th this year, to each of those shrines with his teacher and say prayers. All shamans also on 8 monkey goes to these shrines to kind of renew their contact with the world. And people who have problems, who need prayers for the dead, or who have sick, or just want to help the world, explain to the gringos, try to help us get our act straight, and things like that, they ask Chuchka House or Ahki to go to these places to say prayers. It's an incredible sight. I was there 2 years ago, and the altars are nothing fancy. They're just little blimps, little pimples on the side of the mountain with little hollows worked out where fires are lit and copal and maize and other things are burned. In any one altar, there may be 50 of these places, and since the ceremonies are at night, you come down and there'll be 100 Chuchka there with people of Momostenango asking them to give prayers, helping them, and all you see are their faces lit by these fires. And if you look off in the distance, you'll see them all around the valley, these altars. In the center of the town is the most sacred of them all. It is the center of the world. It is where all of the Chuchka house and all the families go to pray. That's it. Its name is the 6th place. It has the same name as the cross on the sarcophagus of Pakal made 1,500 years ago. I thank you. Water.
There are 3 mics there, and then the ushers are going to come up and down and just pass the cards out to the aisle and then bring them down here.
Where are they?
That's a good question. There's one right over. Yeah.
Where are the mics? I see one up there.
There's one right here.
Where's there?
Right here.
Oh, right there. So the other one must be about the same place. I just have to locate the 3 stones of creation. I'll start with you first.
It seems to me, I remember from my reading that the Mayan calendar has a closing date or an ending date. How does that fit in with your present interpretation of their view of cosmology?
Okay. This is a kind of debate that's been going on for a long time. What you're talking about is that on December the 23rd of the year 2012, the period ending 130000 for how 3 Kanki will occur again. There are a lot of people around the world that are making a lot out of this, right? But the one piece of information that tells us that's not the way the ancient Maya thought about it is there is an inscription at Palenque in which Pakal wrote that 8 days after the end of the first Pictoon, the memory of his accession would be celebrated. That Pictoon is the 8,000th year after the beginning of creation. That will occur in 4774 AD. Now, the world's still got to be around for that Pictoon to end. And so basically, this idea that the world's going to end at 13000, this would have been for the ancient Maya a tremendously important period ending and one that everybody would have gotten excited about. But it's, all right, it's not the end of the world in that sense, okay? But the other sense is this: for the Maya of the Chamula, and in the New Year's pages of the Dresden Codex, all period endings, whether it's the year of 260 days or a year of 365 days or a group of 20 years, is in its way a recreation of the world. And every time the Maya come up to one of those points, the world is in danger again. And unless the community performs
proper ritual and unless the community helps the gods. For instance, the Chamulas do it every year in their Intahimo. They believe that in the period just before Lent begins, that chaos wins and banishes the Sun Christ to the other world. And through their ritual, they must help the Sun Christ out of the world so that he can move in his circuit again, and if he doesn't, the world will end. And so in that sense, every period ending is a destruction and a creation. But in the sense that 13,000 in the ancient Maya mode would be the end of the cosmos and a new beginning, they didn't write about it that way, okay? Now, the second stone, we got a second stone over here, okay?
I have two questions which may or may not be related. The first one is that when the anthropologists started working on Central American anthropology, I'm thinking of people like Evan Vogt, they seem to miss the strong adherence to old ways. And you have to assume they're reasonably good anthropologists. I guess one question I have is why did they seem to miss the cues that suggested that the Maya were still hanging on to old ways and were only very vaguely Christian? And the related question I have is, given the destruction of the priesthood with the conquest, I find it amazing that all these traditions survive so strongly that you can make this concordance between your interpretation of the glyphs and what they're practicing today. And do you have any hypotheses about what accounts for that?
Yeah, those are really neat questions. First of all, people like Evan Vogt and Gary Dawson and other ethnographers who have worked on this, including a really wonderful ethnographer named Raphael Girard, all posed and said that this connection was there. The problem was that the classic period was a blank. We basically knew it only through dirt archaeology, and before the decipherment, we had no real idea what those texts were saying. What has happened in the last 20 years is the decipherment has given us a window on what the ancient Maya were saying about the world. We know now, before we were saying that was the world tree, but we had no idea what their name for it was. And all of a sudden, when the past gets its voice, then we can begin talking about what Maya said about themselves in 700 AD and compare to what they're saying in 1994, and that's where all of a sudden these contacts occurred. Your second question I love even better, boy. I did not pay her to ask that question. Almost all of our social theory for the last 50 years has been based on the Marxist model. We presume that the common people and that the elites are separate and are at war with each other. But Stanley Tambaya, who has studied the Buddhist kingdoms of Southeast Asia, has proposed another model. And in this model, what happens is that there is a replication that begins in household ritual, and at each stage of the complexity, at each stage of the hierarchy, what the people are actually doing is a replica in more elaboration and with more wealthy objects of what is essentially household ritual. In other words, what the king is doing when he lets blood from his penis, when he builds the great temples, when he does all of this, is essentially what the farmer does when he plants maize. And so when you cut off the head of that snake, it grows back, because the brains of that kind of society is not held just by the elite. It means that the exotic, complex understanding of the cosmology of the world is held by all of the people in the society, so the little Chuchkahau shaman in the village could take it forward past the Spanish just as easily as the king could. And I think that's what happened. My high stone there.
Yes, in 1974, I had the great good fortune of a chance meeting with Gertrude Bloom
Yeah.
in San Cristobal de la Casa, and subsequent to that meeting, through her big races, went through a hike for 10 days out through the jungle between Casingo and Panamoho, stopping at Naha on the fifth night.
You met Chantin then?
Met Chantin Bejo, and he gave me one of his cigars, which I still have.
Yeah. Don't smoke it.
Yeah. I wouldn't think of it. But one thing that he told us, and like language communication was very limited, so I want to get your twist on this. He said that when the lock and dome dies, it will be the end of the world.
Yeah.
My interpretation was that it's either the consciousness that they put out to create the world would end with their death, physical death, or whatever you might have to offer.
Well, I have a friend, John McGee, the guy I told you about that worked with old Chun Keen, that told about the tree. John is an ethnographer who speaks Lakandon. He needs no translator. He told me a wonderful story. He's in his late 30s now, and he's never married. And so all of the times that he's gone to Naha, Old Changking makes him sleep with the boys because he's not an adult man yet. He's not married. He can't wait to go back because he's getting married in March. When he goes back this time, he can stay with the men. He's been working with them for a very long time, and we've talked a great deal about this, as my friend Nikolai Gruba has been working with the prophecies of the Krutzog. And this idea of the destruction and recreation of the world is a really fundamental part of the way the Maya see the world. For instance, one of the ways that you can look at the god pot making ceremonies is that when Old Changking makes the god pots, he is destroying the old world and recreating a new world. He is renewing the world, so it's through a destruction and creation process, just like all of the New Year ceremonies are. So in the sense that he's talking about the fact, I think, that the world needs people who know how to do the ritual and who know how to behave correctly, who know how to speak correctly, who know how to deal properly with the gods. And see, I love this, you see. You know how the Chumulas classify us, folks? We are monkeys left over from the third creation. And the reason why they classify us that is because we're the wrong color, we don't walk right, we don't dress right, we don't speak right, and we don't know how to behave like civilized beings. Now, we have for the Chumulas an advantage in that we can bring them special ancestral knowledge because we're outside of the boundaries of the social fabric. And so people like us can bring in special knowledge. We can bring them radios and TVs, and they're perfectly glad to accept those things. But we're not people of the fourth creation. Maya are the people of the fourth creation. And so they're the only ones who know how to talk to the gods in their way of thinking. So when they die, or when the young people don't want to learn those ceremonies anymore, when there is a break in that oral tradition, then for them it threatens the cosmos. And maybe it does. We may be better off to think about that. Can you do one? Say please.
Please. Has anything new been discovered about Mayan music since the discovery of the frieze at Bonampak?
No, except that when we were in Vancouver, this lovely high school girl stood up and said, you know, that Greek music reflected their idea of the cosmos. Do you know, is it possible that the Maya did that too? And I looked at her and said, I don't know, why don't you research that? So maybe 20 years from now, we'll know from a young British Canadian girl, it's this stone's time.
Has there been any investigation, or is it just coincidence, the similarities between the Navajo creation myth and the Maya, and also between the twins and the fact that they refer to first man, first woman, first coyote in Navajo and everything?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Thank you. The details of the different traditions will be a little bit different, but more than any of us have ever been willing to admit or acknowledge, Native Americans have one of the great high religious traditions of the world. And like Christianity, that covers huge boundaries, or Buddhism or Islam, that covers huge areas and has many, many different fugal types of restatements depending on the cultural heritage of the people. Native American religion's the same way. It goes from the Arctic all the way down to Tierra del Fuego. And there are, you know, constant parts of it. Like I just found out when I was up in Canada that in the Northwest Coast stuff, the Milky Way is the tracks of the raven. And I thought, wow, you know, they're locked together. But yeah, we thought of those. And it really is stunning the way all of that works. So, is there someone there? Yes, that's the second stone.
I'm an astrologer, and I was listening to your talk more as the archetypes of the gods. And there's a story where the first planet evolved from the sun was Mercury, which is Hermes, which is the archetype of the, when he came to life, he stole a tortoise and made a musical instrument out of it and gave it to the sun god. So I see that as a parallel as you're talking about and also the first gods being twins.
Mm-hmm.
And the second planet, then the two twin planets were Tiamat and Hermes. And so I'm wondering, do you see possibly that they're talking about their archetypal ancestry on another planet?
I don't think so. There are all sorts of different ways of approaching this that different scholars around the world have tried to generate that will explain this. Like Jung talks about it in archetypes, and the way he talks about it, they would have to be hardwired in our genetics. I don't think that I doubt if it's hardwired. I don't think that probably the concepts are that much. What seems to me is this, is that when human beings need to find metaphor to encode their understanding of the world, the grist in the mill, the sources that they go for the metaphor, is the natural world around them. Now, our science does the same thing, but our science has, in general, a very short time span. And its vision it tends to be, even though we look out to the edge of the universe, it is, in a way, very myopic. And what I mean by that is we come to conclusion after we have vested very little time. Many of these great mythologies around the world, like my friend Johannes and his work with the Rowau, are encoding knowledge of the natural world that is thousands of years old. And so it has a profound subtlety that is very difficult for our scientists to match. Our scientists can access absolutely different kinds of knowledge about the same phenomena, but that the similarities in my way of thinking comes from that rather than in some, what's very important for me to do is those of us that come from the European tradition, when we look at something like the Maya, we're looking at something that's very different than our way of understanding the world. And so what we do is try to match what we see there is what we know from our own world. Well, what that does is it tends to account for the genius of Native American peoples as coming from Europe or Asia. And I think it is incredibly important for all of us just to step back and say that the genius of Native Americans comes from these worlds. It is their work and their accomplishments. They didn't need Europeans, they didn't need astronauts, and they didn't need Asians to tell them how to understand the world. Are we at the high stone?
Can you comment on a similarity of the ancient Scandinavian Yggdrasil, the cosmic tree, the world axis, with the serpent twining at the roots and the branches, to the Maya cosmic tree and associated symbols on the other side of the world?
Okay, that's the same problem. And again, there seems to be two possibilities. One is that trees are dominant in both environments. And they're natural symbols. They grow, they have their roots in the ground, they have their branches up above, they do all sorts of lovely natural things that just make them ready-made symbols. That's one way to look at it. And it's probably the way that'll get us in least trouble. The other way, and I'm beginning to take this seriously, although I fought Dave Kelly over it for 20 years, is that in the very ancient past, 50,000, 70,000 years ago, there is a shamanistic tradition out of Central Asia that goes in both directions. And that many of these things, for instance, if you go to Scandinavia, you're dealing with Laplanders and you're dealing with the shamanistic tradition there. And that many of these definitions of the world come from that shamanistic tradition. Now here, I'm not talking just about myth, because one of the things our scientists who have taken trance seriously have discovered is that there are physiological experiences in trance, whether it is drug-induced or whether it's performance-induced, that all human beings share. In the Americas, much of it's drug-induced. It will be nicotine-induced, it will be peyote-induced, it will be mescaline-induced. There are several different major chemical families that induce it, and each one of these has a constant physiological component about what's said. What happened in the old world is it's less drug-induced as it's induced by anorexia and sense deprivation. But the fact that the brain goes through the same kinds of physiological effects when it goes through trance may unify components of all of these experiences that human beings go through all around the world. And that's the other possibility. I don't know which is true. It's your time again.
My turn, please. I'm not sure whether you can pass this one, I'll ask you another one, but basically there's several questions on shamans in particular. This one's implicit in the title of your talk in the book. This definition of shaman, what is a shaman and how is this term applicable for the Maya rather than priest?
Okay.
So the definition of shaman is somewhat related.
I was explaining that today at Wilson High School. Was this Wilson High School?
Wilson High School.
Yeah. Eliade is the one that really put shaman as a term into the anthropological basket of terms. It comes from the study of the Tungi people, and there are a lot of anthropologists and people who think it's not right to take the word for their religious practitioner, which is shaman, and apply it to other people. But I think it's a pretty good idea because as a prototype of a definition of components of religious experience, I think Eliade was right. Here are the components of shamanism. One is there are components of worldview that are constant. In almost all shamanistic traditions, there is a worldview that has a central axis. That axis mundi can be a tree, it can be a pole, it can be all sorts of different things. The world is usually divided into the four directions. The directions have color, and there's an arc of heaven, and there's some means of communicating between vertical orientations in the world. Second characteristic, religious leaders are not ordained and appointed. They are not sanctioned by institutions. They are called. And they're called usually through dreaming. So that it's not a matter of going to a seminary and getting appointed as a priest. Anyone can become a shaman. That doesn't mean a shaman doesn't go through a lot of training. It's just that they apprentice themselves to an experienced, well-known shaman, and they learn by doing. Now, the problem in the state is how do you match a system that has direct and predictable authority exchange and descent with a shamanistic tradition? And one of the ways people have done it in all sorts of positions, including, my friends, the Japanese, in case you don't know it, the Japanese have a shamanistic state, is they say that a central family has special blood and special access to the supernatural and therefore are natural shamans. And that's exactly what the Emperor of Japan is. If any of you saw his initiation rituals when they were giving them the jades and they were giving him the mirrors and they were giving them all of those are all shamanistic objects that the Emperor of Japan must have and manipulate in order to keep Japan in its proper balance. And then finally, in shamanism, the fundamental kind of religious experience that is the heart of all of this is that shamanism always involves curing. It can be curing on the individual level or it can be curing on the level of the community, and that's what the king usually did. He operated at the community level, and they do it through trance journey. In other words, the shaman himself, through trance, journeys into the other world and speaks with the ancestors and finds out what the problem is, comes back and fixes it, or they call beings from the other world into our world in order to help in the healing. And the Maya had both kinds. They both transformed. In fact, all over Mesoamerica today, you have Nahualism. You talk to a Yucatec that gets a pig follows him down the road at night, that ain't a natural pig. That's somebody who's got something against him is trying to catch him at night. Go to Yucatan, you'll have all sorts of stories of people that shoot cats in their roofs, roof beams of the house, or pigs in their outside yards. Walk outside and there's a man laying there. That's a shaman they killed, who once he was dead transformed back into his real form. So this sort of part is very much a part of a lot of Native American religion and a lot of the traditions, and specifically of Olmec and Maya, Nahuatl, and a whole bunch of them, almost all of them in Mesoamerica. Those little figures that float around, in fact, I've got one on. There's the paddler, floating. Okay, let's see, that was
for me, so you gotta go over there.
okay. Do we have someone at this stone?
Yeah.
Yes.
Linda, you spoke about the portal to the other world. I was wondering, now how is that portal open? And then once open, how long did it last and how was it used?
Oh, that's a neat question. Thank you. Anybody can open it. And the way that you opening it is you make a centering table. And that very act that I showed you, that altar that had the 4 candles and the cross and the thing, that opens a portal. Any person who in a ritual in his farm, in a house, a shaman who comes in, like one of the things that today's Yucatecs will do is if there's something going wrong in the house, like your machines don't work and your kids are sick and everybody's angry at everybody and the dog barks and, just one of us, you know how it is, just everything goes wrong, right? Or your mother-in-law's been there and she's left a path of hate behind, right? Right? It was always my husband's mother-in-law that caused that problem in my family. What you do is you go in, you ask a shaman in, and what they'll do is they'll quarter their house and center it. That opens the portal. And then what they will do is they will catch all of that bad feeling in one corner. They call it perching it. And then they capture it, and they take it out, and they let it go in the wilderness, away from the social house. Now, you think that's, not you, us, we think that's crazy. But I'm an alcoholic, and an alcoholic who was my sponsor once gave me a little piece of advice. And that's when I felt like pushing my hand through the screen of the computer because the machine wasn't acting right. Just try talking to the little people inside, and everything would get better. And I've noticed that if I just talk to the machines in my life and treat them like they're living beings, it's probably because I'm focusing myself a little bit better and paying attention to what I'm doing, but things seem to go a little bit better. Okay?
Over 3,000 years ago, long before humans thought of basketball or soccer, the Mayans were playing a sport called Mesoamerican ball game, which was once one of the most important traditions in their culture. Today, a group of Mexicans are trying to revive this ancient game, and Armando is at the heart of this movement.
Mi nombre es Armando Osorio y me dedico a difundir el juego de pelota en México y en otros países. Es un juego de invasión donde yo tengo que ir sacando de su propia cancha al oponente hasta sacar la pelota por en medio de la línea de fondo que ellos tienen.
Look closely and you'll see what makes this sport so unique, that you can only use your hips to hit the ball. No hands, no feet, just your bare hips against a solid rubber ball.
La pelota está hecha de caucho macizo, es de un árbol, de hule. La parte más difícil de este juego es el inicio, porque se te hacen hematomas muy grandes, moretones muy grandes. Hace como 3 años éramos 4 equipos. El año pasado que convoqué a todos los estados ya éramos 8 y ahorita ya somos 17 estados.
Hola, mi nombre es Reina María Puxip y me dedico al juego de pelota. Este deporte es tanto como masculino como femenino. Decidimos en este deporte llevarlo en dualidad como nuestros ancestros nos los han heredado. Entonces yo me siento muy contenta que tanto como el hombre, la mujer tienen la misma capacidad de jugar este deporte. Para mí es muy importante porque es un legado que le vamos a dejar a nuestros niños, a nuestros hijos, a los hijos de nuestros hijos.
La última meta de este deporte es que haya un aporte a la sociedad. Para mí mi sueño más grande sería que estos jóvenes pudieran ser becados para poder tener otro nivel económico y tengan una oportunidad en la sociedad. Cuando vino la Santa Inquisición fue que empezó a prohibir este deporte. Si no hubiese sido prohibido por ellos, ahorita fuera el deporte más famoso que el fútbol. La última meta de este deporte es poder hacer una liga profesional como es el fútbol. El deporte es más que un simple deporte, este es un amor hacia el deporte.
This is Groovy Baby.